Hi, my name's Tanya Trinh, and I'm a cornea, refractive surgery and external diseases fellow at the University of Toronto. Today, I'm going to give a talk on unconscious bias that we all exhibit and how this contributes to imposter syndrome in women. I remember that conversation so clearly. I was working with a close male colleague with whom I have a great working relationship. He relies on me, I rely on him. He leans on me, I lean on him. I have a huge amount of trust and admiration for this person. It was a busy day and we had ducked out for a coffee break between sessions. And I remember being super excited about being invited to participate in planning an educational event, which was going to be the highlight of the quarter. I believed in the format, the educational message, and I believed that there was going to be something for everyone, including the speaker lineup. And I suggested that we add a female panelist because in the history of this event, we were yet to have a guest female feature speaker. I will never forget the instantaneous manner in which he turned to me and said, "I choose people based on a meritocracy." His comment held no malice. And yet by his tone, it was end of conversation. I was taken aback. I was stunned. I remember feeling this flush of red rush through my veins and my face going red and my dry mouth and uttering the words, well, of course it's a meritocracy. I wouldn't have it any other way. I felt so embarrassed. Here was a person that I looked up to who thought that I wanted to put a woman on the panel just for the fact that she was a woman. I had become that person. What was I even doing, thinking that I could make suggestions for this panel? I clearly had no understanding of what it takes to select people to be on a panel of that caliber. I went home feeling deeply, deeply unsettled. In the flash of an instant, I had become an imposter. Imposter syndrome in women is disproportionate and crippling. Unfortunately, both men and women have unconscious gender bias that we exhibit that can contribute to this, innocently and inadvertently. But by communicating with intention and being aware of this, we can empower women of merit and harness that other 50% of the world's ability. So what is imposter syndrome anyway? Imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their talent, their accomplishments, their intelligence and achievements, even in the face of objective measures to the contrary, and harbors this persistent internalized fear that they are a fraud. Coined in 1978 by two psychology professors, Clance and Ames, they hypothesized that women are more likely to be susceptible because success for women is contraindicated by societal expectations and preconceived self-evaluations. Now, we all know now that Imposter Phenomenon, as it is known today, actually affects 70% of all individuals. That's 7 out of 10 people sitting in this front row who have experienced this at one point in their life. Just imagine that. There's also increasing evidence to suggest that it affects women at a greater proportion and a greater severity. Just imagine that. And it starts young for men and women. It is pervasive. We grow up in this complex ecosystem of gestures and words and symbolism and actions that reinforce these attributes. What are the risk factors for imposter phenomenon? Amusingly, it is kind of like the checklist that you need to get into medicine and then get into ophthalmology. So if we look at this checklist, it looks something like this. Overprotective parents with exceedingly high expectations, tick. Advanced coursework, postgraduate degrees, surrounded by high achievers. Tick. First in a generation, ethnicity, or minority group to achieve XYZ. Tick. Racial identities. Tick. Or if you define success or competence in one of 5 ways. 1. The perfectionist, where 99 out of 100 is still a failure. 2. The expert, where I need to get that degree, I need to get that master's, I need to get that PhD before I legitimately feel that I belong there. The naturally talented. If I have to work actually at something, then probably I don't have that talent to start with. The soloist. I need to be able to do this exactly all by myself and not have any help, and that is the only way I can judge that I'm competent. Or the superhuman complex, commonly affecting mothers, where they're commonly feeling like they're having to juggle so many balls and keep them all up in the air at the same time to feel like they're genuinely on top of anything. And this environment evokes this constant sense of shame when we cannot achieve what we want. And it's this shame environment that contributes heavily to the way men and women define success and failure within ourselves. Research has shown that males are more likely to define success and attribute them to their own self-ability, whereas women are more likely to attribute their success to the hard work it took to get there. They are more likely to explain away their success. Oh, I had help. It was just a bit of luck, rather than attribute it to themselves. And conversely, when it comes to failure, psychologists have found that men are more likely to attribute that to, I wasn't really that interested, or I didn't really put in the work for that. Whereas women faced with failure are more likely to internalize that sense of shame and blame themselves and their lack of ability. But why do we care? Imposter phenomenon has been associated with exceedingly high rates of depression, anxiety, burnout, inability to sleep and focus. And it's not like our jobs aren't already hard enough with all of that in the background. So why is it then that Boeing and IBM and Apple and Google and the consulting firms and the media markets and the STEM fields are looking so closely into imposter syndrome? It's because they realize that there is an individual cost. And that individual cost can look something like this. The procrastinator, where I will put off doing a task because I know it's just not going to meet the impossibly high standard that I set. The over-preparer, who spends a disproportionate amount of time on a task that's necessary for a successful outcome. The person who's not willing to contribute their ideas to a discussion or not put themselves forward for a position because they feel that they don't have any right to belong there. These organizations realize that this individual cost on an en masse scale comes at an enormous cost to the organization. Now, you've heard me speak about how we all unconsciously contribute to this. And we like to think of ourselves as being pretty savvy, with the topic, that we're sophisticated advocates for gender equality. But let's take some examples right on our doorstep of medicine and ophthalmology and take a closer look at what we're doing to contribute to this. Letters of recommendation. In 2009, the University of Arizona looked at 300 letters of applicants for female and medical faculty, and they looked at the differences in the language contained within these letters of references. And they found that these letters for women and men differed systematically and negatively for women. Letters of recommendation for men were found to be 16% longer than they were for women, 2.5 times more likely to mention ringing endorsements. He is the best for the job. He is the man for that position. More likely to mention his ability or achievements, his career, his research. Conversely, women were more likely to have letters that were 7 times more likely to include personal characteristics. completely irrelevant to the application. Twice as likely to include negative comments like, she's a challenging personality, and 50% more likely to include grindstone adjectives, she is a hard worker, rather than describing her ability. And if we fast forward to 2019, a similar study looked at ophthalmology residency applications at a medical school in the US over a period of 2017 to 2018, and found that the same language biases were found, even accounting for same baseline characteristics in USMLE, in GPA scores, in numbers of honor awards and academic activities, and even the same baseline number of male and female letter writers. So that is significant. So why should we care about that? It's because despite women having access to educational opportunities since the 1970s, we have been getting business and law and medical degrees, this hasn't actually translated into a commensurate increase in women into these particular positions. And that is a problem. We refuse to acknowledge that there are gatekeeping practices. It's not like these people came and wrote these letters differently for men and for women. It is not an active act. But these gatekeeping practices, educational requirements notwithstanding, it is those letters of recommendation, those interviews that continue to keep the same people in and year out. So let's take a flip side on the other side of the gatekeeping. Now we're not applying, but now we're judging. In 1997, Wernerus and Wold were two Swedish immunologists who were quite puzzled at the fact that there was a significant number of female scientific PhDs being achieved, and yet they were being half as successful as their male counterparts in being successful for a fellowship postdoctoral application. So they applied to the Swedish Medical Research Council to look at their evaluation practices to see if men and women were being evaluated equally. It took 2 years and a court order for them to have access to the information, because the Swedish Medical Research Council believed that they were abiding by a meritocracy and that their processes were gender blind. What they found shocked the overwhelmingly male scientific committee. Women didn't have to be twice as good as men. Women had to be 2.5 times more productive than men just to achieve the same score. If I translate that down to real terms, when I broke down the metrics and calculated this out, it equates to 3 papers in Science or Nature, impact factors of 41 or 42 today, to achieve the same score, or 30 papers to the equivalent of the impact factor of 3 to achieve the same score. These and many similar papers show that peer reviewers have difficulties judging scientific merit independent of gender. And these processes happen again and again. Now, I've given you 2 fairly large examples of the way that our human nature is frail and the fragility of the systems that are designed to supposedly eliminate gender bias. But it's more than that. It's insidious. Let's take a look at the use of professional titles. In 2017, a US academic center published the rates of gender-based introductions at a conference. And they found that women were more likely to be introduced using their first name and less likely to be introduced using a professional title. Similarly, another academic center in the US, looking at internal medicine ground rounds, found that when a female introducer introduced a male speaker, professional titles were used 95% of the time. But when flipped and a male introducer introduced a female speaker, professional titles were used 49% of the time. And this was published just last year. So it happens on a day-to-day basis. And it is something that is insidious that we don't always recognize that we do. Now, I'm not here to tell women how to cope with imposter syndrome. But the first thing that we should all know is that this is not something that people can share their experiences and share their way out of this feeling. It's really important and a great first step to talk about it. But it is really about untangling that cognitive mindset to reverse that toxic ecosystem in which women are expected to flourish. The first step is to acknowledge and evaluate it. This is real, and it affects a significant proportion of individuals and a greater proportion and severity to women. How many of us have actually sat down and thought about saying to your female trainee or your female fellow, have you ever experienced imposter phenomenon? It's come to my attention that this has become an issue. If you are, I'm open to talking about it. And then back that up by independently evaluating what your systems are in role hiring, division of surgical cases, and so on. The second thing that we should do is to change the way that we speak about women. It's not as simple as being polite, and it's not enough just to be not rude. Think about the way you write that reference letter for a female as if you were writing it for a male. Make sure that we are using the appropriate honorifics when introducing a female, not only on the podium, but in the consult room and in the tea room. Make sure that we're referring to women based on their qualifications and their professional attributes rather than their personal characteristics and physical attributes. And the sexist jokes need to stop. What people don't often realize is that junior females are silenced in these types of conversations. It's not uncommon still today for people to hear the words, oh, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, or, you know, I'm joking, right? What that female sees is a person and a colleague who knows the difference between right and wrong, enough to signpost it, see the barrier, and chooses to step over that anyway. It doesn't show that that person has any respect for the difference of right or wrong. And the only thing that that junior female can do is smile and nod because of the threat of being branded too sensitive to take a joke. This power differential exploitation is what contributes to women feeling the way that they do, that this is a boys' club, and contributes to that feeling of, I don't belong here. The third thing that we can do is be an ally. Take the time to mention their accomplishments to them because you know that they're internalizing the opposite. I think you nailed that consult today. That was really tricky. I think you did so well on that surgical case today. I was really proud of that paper you published. And if you catch them attributing their success away to things like, oh, it was the team, or it was really just a fluke, stop them and get them to own their success that was pivotal to that achievement. The second thing is to be an active mentor. And this requires taking an actual active interest in their day-to-day activities and remembering that the power differential is something that is very strong psychologically and that they are less likely to highlight their achievements to you, let alone their failures. It is very difficult to speak about. So opening those doors and lessening that barrier of conversation is absolutely crucial. And the third thing is to recognize our own bias. So nominate and think of nominating women for that leadership position, for that development opportunity. The process should be is that women shouldn't be put on panels just because they're female. Nothing is more demeaning than being on a panel just because you're a woman. It devalues us. What should happen is that there's an opportunity that is open, and we recognize that we're going to think of the usual suspects to fill that spot. And we take an extra step to think of other women or minorities who also have merit to fill that position, and then we make the decision from that extended pool. This ensures that every person sitting on that committee or panel is a person of merit, and it means you have a greater chance of achieving true diversity in your organization. That evening, after the conversation and my failed attempt at trying to balance the panel, I went home and thought long and hard about what it was that so deeply unsettled me. And it actually wasn't what I had said. That was my imposter syndrome speaking to me, making me feel like I shouldn't be a part of that conversation. In fact, it was what my colleague had so casually said. I choose people based on a meritocracy. Because to me, as a junior female, as a junior colleague, it could only mean one of two things: that there weren't women of merit who deserved to be on that panel, or perhaps that they had not taken the time. And it does require time in this ecosystem in which we exist to find women of merit and to nominate them. We, as doctors and scientists, are not immune to human fragility when it comes to bias. But by being aware of this, changing our words and our actions, and developing systems that have built-in resistance to this fragility is going to go a long way into empowering women to come into their power. If we don't do this, we allow imposter syndrome to flourish, and we deny the world the opportunity to harness that talent from that other 50%. Thank you very much.